dogs are, we should feed our animals like they eat in nature. Our dogs are carnivores. They don't cook.
Right.
I've never seen a wolf light a fire. So therefore we must feed them raw diets, or
Right.
natural diets. Cats, are carnivores and should eat like that. The doctors tell us to eat fresh fruit and vegetables. Why on earth is the vet profession telling us to eat, kibble? They must be in big kibble's pocket.
Welcome to The Consult Room, the podcast where we explore the evolving world of modern pet care. I'm Dr Paul Manktelow, a UK veterinary surgeon with a deep passion for pet health and welfare. In each episode, I'll be exploring key issues, challenging perspectives, and offering expert insight and practical advice. Because ultimately, my mission is to improve the lives of pets and the people who love them. Today's episode dives into one of the most debated topics in pet care, nutrition, and asks a simple question: are we feeding our pets based on facts or fads? To help me explore the myths, marketing, and misinformation around pet food, I'm joined by someone who's become one of the most trusted voices in this space, Cat Henstridge, or as most people know her online, Cat the Vet. Now, Cat has spent her career in small animal first opinion practice, and I've known her for many, many years. And I think we first met as vet students doing work experience at the Liverpool University Equine Unit, probably back in 2001 or 2002. So we're really showing our age now. But we also worked together a few years later on the Channel 4 show Animal Madhouse. Now, most people will recognize Cat from social media. In fact, if you've ever been on social media, you'll recognize Cat. But she has built a huge following using her platform to tackle misinformation and deliver sensible, practical pet health advice. She's become a real force for good in helping pet owners make informed, evidence-based decisions about their animals' care. Cat, welcome to the Consult Room.
Thank you for having me. What a lovely introduction. Yes, it has been quite a while, Paul. But what a wonderful time we've had.
I know. It is quite scary when you start throwing dates into things like that, isn't it? Just showing our age. But now, Kat, you've recently opened your own practice. How is it going?
Yes, I have, with my husband, who's also a vet. It's going really well, thank you. It is a really different challenge being a practice owner rather than just an employee. I've only ever been an employee. I've been quite happy as an employee, but it was something that we needed to do. The opportunity arose. We found a great site. We had some great nurses who wanted to come and work with us as a team. So yes, we're 6 months old, just over. And yeah, it's going pretty well. It is going quite well.
Now, you say you've opened this with your husband.
Yes.
Is this couple goals or is this couple nightmares? Because I don't think I could work with my husband. How is that going?
So he's in charge and I'm having to learn that. So he's been a clinic director and built practices within the corporate setting up from scratch twice. And he's been a clinic director for over 10 years. So he really does know what he's doing. So I'm just sort of trotting along for the ride and have to remember that I have to do what I'm told, which I'm not very good at. So I think if you was to ask him what was his biggest challenge, it's probably getting me to do what he wants me to do. But generally, it's going fine, actually. We get on quite well. There have been the odd, sort of stern words, forced whispers in the staff room where the nurses aren't there, but we know each other. Like it's a lovely team between us. We've all known each other for at least 10 years and we've all worked together in different practices. The nurses and Dave has and I have, and the nurses have all worked together. So we know each other. So it's fine actually if we have a bit of a breakdown because we all get on so well and know each other so well. But
it's great.
Just as a general challenge of, it's been enormous. It's huge. Loads of people are opening their own independent practices. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for it and everyone's like, oh my goodness, what a great idea. And, hopefully it will all work out okay in the end, but it has been quite stressful. I'm not going to lie.
And it's funny, isn't it? Because I even know going into sort of a leadership position, you just take, your day never ends, does it? There's always something that you're thinking about when, the practice closes. There's always some sort of thing that is sort of hanging around. So yeah, you can't ever really switch off, can you? But, best of luck. I think that's, it's great news. So, Kat, you've built a huge following online. I think at my last check, you've got 323,000 followers on TikTok, where I think your myth busting content really resonates. But I want to ask, what first motivated you to start tackling misinformation on social media?
So that my whole drive to getting on social media was actually driven by correcting misinformation. And it started because I wanted to correct misinformation about our profession. I've been doing it quite a long time now. And I started to get to the stage not long after we did Animal Madhouse, actually, where I just started to get really cross with the negative representation of vets in the media. And, it was ever thus. We've just come out of the back of the latest CMA report and, we've been taking a beating again. So not a huge amount has changed. But I got very frustrated at the time that there just didn't seem to be any sort of positive representation or any voice defending us. Now, this is a while ago. The BVA are much better at it now. But back then, I think there was this real reticence to get involved in the media. We had to remain impartial and professional and all of that jazz. So that was the driver right from the start, to just sort of put across our side of the story. And then if you spend any amount of time online in the pet space, whether you want to get involved with poor information or not, it just comes at you. It's massive. And again, there's not as much correct information or correcting of poor information as there should be because of exactly the same thing. There's a lot of reticence to do it because you get an enormous amount of kickback, which I end up dealing with on a very regular basis. The people who really know what they're talking about, why on earth would they be online with people telling them that they don't know what they're talking about when they've got a job with people who are more than willing to work with them because they know what they're talking about, and so there is a bit of a gap in the market, and the profession just in general has been very slow to fill it. We are not the trusted voice that we should be in the online space. It's definitely getting better. There's definitely more people out there doing it now, and I think that's fantastic. But we were caught massively on the back foot by social media, I think, and that to the detriment of the ordinary pet owner who just wants to do the best thing and is struggling to find the right information. And so, in my own small way, I'm trying to recorrect that balance.
Yeah, and I would argue it's not a small way at all, Kat. You've got a huge following and a huge amount of respect as well. And I also like how you sort of jump in to defend a lot of that, especially when, like you say, the veterinary profession gets a battering. And I've seen you very often jump in and support practices, vets, nurses, support staff. And it's great to see. And and I'm sure I can say thank you on behalf of the whole profession for that, because it is great to see. And like you say, a lot of people are too scared to jump in, aren't they? Or they're worried about, the repercussions of it. But nutrition seems to attract more misinformation than almost any other area of pet health. Why do you think it sparks so much debate and division?
Yes, it definitely does. Well, I think it's because everybody feeds their pet. So everybody has an opinion because every pet owner has made a choice, a deliberate choice of what they're feeding their pet. There's very few people that just close their eyes and pick a bag off the shelf and just feed it. And there are some, but not many. And also, nutrition seems quite simple. I think we all feed ourselves. We all listen to the messages of nutrition for humans. And so without wishing to sound patronizing, nutrition is a science, and there's an enormous amount of research behind it. But on the surface, it can seem very simple, and therefore people feel like they understand it when maybe they don't. And also, there's an enormous amount of commentators online who think they understand it, claim to understand it, educate about it. But when you do know what you're talking about, they reveal themselves very quickly as not understanding it very much and not giving out the correct information. And again, it's a huge flashpoint for negativity for the profession because we are seen as very biased and there is a narrative that we don't know about nutrition, that we're not taught about nutrition, that we're unknowledgeable about nutrition, because our opinions run counter to this populist narrative that is online that is so beguiling, because on the surface it makes a lot of sense. Dogs are we should feed our animals like they eat in nature. Our dogs are carnivores. They don't cook.
Right.
I've never seen a wolf light a fire. So therefore we must feed them raw diets, or
Right.
natural diets. Cats, are carnivores and should eat like that. The doctors tell us to eat fresh fruit and vegetables. Why on earth is the vet profession telling us to eat, kibble? They must be in big kibble's pocket. That can be the
Right.
only reason. And I think some of those misconceptions are really understandable. We do talk in a very different fashion than our human counterparts do. And so I think it really makes a lot of sense to think, well, why are the vets so different? Is there
Mm.
some sort of conspiracy going on? And then that feeds very nicely into internet conspiracy theories and negativity. And so it comes at all sides from nutrition. But I think at its base, it's seen to be simpler than, let's say, vaccinations and virology, or, pharmaceutical medications or anti-flea medications. I think nutrition seems simple, and therefore people feel like they understand it, but often they are getting the wrong end of the stick.
The pet food industry is obviously huge, isn't it? And there are within it some big companies with big budgets, with really powerful marketing campaigns. And do you think they're able to create influence and make claims that aren't always rooted in science? Do you think there are companies out there that like you say, can create narratives and stories that people really buy into without necessarily having to tick the box of science?
Oh yes, I think there's hundreds of them, but they're not the big ones. They're often the smaller ones. The big companies, the Mars and the Nestle, the Purina, the Hills, the Royal Canin, very rarely market at all. They do not market in a way that's not based on evidence and science, because that's what those companies are built on. And they have the sort of confidence to not need to market in a misleading fashion, because they genuinely know what they're talking about. Um, but we see it an enormous amount in smaller companies who want to use this populist narrative to further their own product. That doesn't necessarily mean their products are bad. It just means that it's an exceptionally effective way to market. Negative marketing, and to a similar extent, misleading marketing is
I know you hate that, don't
hugely.
you?
Oh
You
yes, I
hate
do.
that.
Yeah,
I've
it's my
seen you jump on
personal.
that quite a
Yeah,
lot.
it's my personal pet hate, and it's become something of like a personal crusade, because I'm
Yeah.
just so annoyed with these awful adverts.
It's lazy as well, isn't it? It's
It's
really
ma- it's
lazy.
it's awful, and it's a
Yeah.
real hallmark of a company, I think, that is putting profit before their customers, and they're happy to market in a way that creates mistrust of their entire industry in order to make sales.
Hmm.
And very little of it is based on science or evidence or at all. Um, and it just reflects really badly on them. But it's a very, very effective marketing tactic, because
Hmm.
it's attention grabbing. People are desperate to do the right thing for their pets. It feeds into a populist narrative that they see anyway online, and therefore they buy into it and they buy the product. And also the pet food industry now is hugely lucrative, but incredibly competitive. And so it is a way for brands to lift themselves above others and to gain attention and therefore sales. But it's not something that I like.
Well, another thing you don't like, which I've seen, which I think is brilliant, is when you have an advert or a marketing campaign with somebody that's in scrubs that clearly isn't a vet or a nurse, and you call it out and you say, and it is because they do use sort of actors sometimes, don't they? And say things like, "Oh, the animals that I see in my clinic," and you're very quick to
Mm.
say, "I don't think you do," and it's
That was
great
an
because
extraordinary advert for a pet food company. Yes, because I'd already
yeah,
seen that content creator make something. And then her next one, because these companies just go to content creators and they say, "Can you
yeah,
make me 4 videos about
yeah,
our pet food and tell everybody how great it is?" I mean, that's user generated content. So that's content that content creators who are online as normal people create.
yeah,
And then it seems very natural. So it just seems like you're scrolling, you see a beauty creator, then you see someone talking about their cats, and then you see someone talking about their cat's food. And it takes a while to realize that's a sponsored paid for real or video, rather than it being like a genuine thing. So again, it's a very and it's everyone's marketing. I don't know how many beauty gurus you follow, Paul, or how many concealers are fed to you online, but I get loads, and some of it is real and some of it isn't. And so so she obviously created this. She will have probably done that whole thing herself, but the brand okayed it, and it was okayed. Their marketing department said that was all right.
It's really worrying, isn't
When
it?
she presented herself as if she was a vet professional, and I was like, I have just seen you on another UGC advert talking about deodorant. I know, and that one did really, really make me cross. Yes.
Yeah. But alongside this, I just want to talk about the variety of diets available now. It's really easy as somebody with a pet to get really confused in this landscape, isn't it? Because we've now got raw, grain-free, vegan, insect-based, human grade, organic. There's so many different types. And without commenting on, the quality or the legitimacy of any of those diets, I just wanted to get your take on how confusing it is for people with pets at home as to what is the right thing to feed.
Oh, massively. I think if I wasn't in the profession and had pets, I'd be completely flummoxed, because you're just desperate to do the right thing. We all know nutrition is really important, and it's just such a basic requirement of health. Everybody gets that. And yes, the pet food aisles are full, the supermarkets are full, the adverts online are full, and there's this smorgasbord of options. So I think it is really, really hard for pet owners to navigate through it. And the one trusted independent professional in their lives is the vet. Most of them will be heading to the vet, particularly with young animals, and that is our opportunity to sort of have a chat about nutrition, find out what they're feeding, tell them, the pros and cons. But I think that even we shy away from it. I shy away from these conversations, but then when they, and if I get talking, I find it difficult to stop. But it's hard because people make these decisions based out of love. And if you as the vet then say, oh, okay, well, I maybe wouldn't choose that for your growing pet, or, oh, well, you could, these are the brands or the companies that I would trust implicitly. Nobody wants to upset clients, and it can be a huge flashpoint to upset clients. And so I think it's really understandable that we do shy away. But somebody has to guide them through, like you say, this ridiculously, hugely confusing market. But the one good thing really out of it is it in some ways, it doesn't matter much what they feed, because if a diet is marketed as complete and balanced in the EU, it has to contain all the nutrition that the animal needs when they're an adult. There's it can be more confusing for growing animals. So at least we have that.
That's quite good, isn't it? Because it means if you use that as a sort of a benchmark, you don't really have to get into the debate about what type of food, as long as it's complete and balanced. And I think because it's a bit difficult, isn't it? Because a lot of these diets, which I sort of consider lifestyle a little bit, because they might align with the sort of pet owners' sort of beliefs or preferences, or around sort of eating meat or sustainability or things like that. But that point you've made there is really good, because it sort of gives us that ability to consider things wider than what we used to do as vets, which was do a complete commercially prepared, food, kibble or tins. And so, yeah, it's a really good point.
Yeah. I mean, that's still what I would advise. But it just doesn't. I think the other thing that's really hard for some owners to grasp about nutrition is it really is that easy. Open the bag, feed the food, get on with your day. It's nothing in life is that easy. And yes, we're putting a lot of trust in these pet food companies. And yes, some of them deserve it and some of them maybe don't. But ultimately, it's a huge source of stress and anxiety for pet owners. And I'm just like, feed a diet they like, feed one you can afford, feed one that makes you feel good, because that's what we want, and whether that's the bag is pretty, your favorite influencer told you to eat it, to feed it, whatever it is, if as long as it's complete and balanced, you can do that. You can just open the packet and feed the animal. And you don't have to cook, you don't have to spend tens and tens of pounds a week just to nourish your animal. which is another really damaging message that comes from the online space, is that you must feed these, freshly cooked,
Mm.
beautiful. I mean, there's, you can buy your dog lasagna, like a commercially prepared lasagna for them, which is great if you can afford it. But
Yeah.
there's not a lot of people that can. And I think a lot of that guilt and shame is something else that makes me really cross, because it's just so distressing to people.
I'm glad you brought that up about cost as well, because we know in the current economic climate, some people are really struggling to afford any pet food at all. I mean, I work for the Blue Cross, and we gave out, I think, 4 million pet meals in the last 12 months to our pet food bank partnerships, which really shows that, there are some people that would not be able to afford those premium diets. But do you think that affordability and access needs to be part of that nutrition conversation too? Like, we have to be bold and say, actually, you can get really good balanced food across all price points, but we don't get that message across very often, do we?
Hugely. I think it's really important. And I think as vets, we're very used to speaking about cost and working with people's budgets. One might even call it contextualized care. I don't know if you've heard about that, Paul. It's a very new concept.
Just a little bit.
And that comes in every aspect, doesn't it? And I think, and again, you know, there's this narrative of, the supermarket pet foods are just awful. Look at these terrible brands on the shelf. And, there are some very economical budget brands that have been established for decades in this country and have been nourishing animals that entire time in an incredibly affordable way. And some of those diets are made by the companies that make the super premium researched prescription therapeutic diets. That
Mm.
they are able, because of the skill of their formulators, and that's what it's all. That's what matters the most, is who's creating this diet to make it complete and balanced and ensuring that all the nutrients your animal needs are in that food. And there are some companies which do the whole range, from super premium, cutting edge, the latest ingredient technology to, do all sorts of wonderful things for health. They're also making the stuff that's on the supermarket shelves that will feed your pet for a very small amount per day. And it's that skill level to be able to do that while still creating safe, balanced diets for animals. And I think there are some people who feel very guilty about it. There are some people who have fed this brand since they were a kid 50 years ago and just haven't given it any thought. But it doesn't matter, because the animal is getting all the nutrients it needs in a really cost-effective way. Um, could they be
Well,
on some extra omega-3? Well, yes. Do they absolutely have to be? Well, no. You know?
I mean, we could all be on probably a bit of extra omega-3, couldn't we? And this is one of the things that I often say, is that, we spend so much time thinking about or pressuring people to feed exactly the right balanced food for their dogs, and yet, as humans, we very rarely have a complete balanced diet, don't we? And I don't think there's any forgiveness. But for me, and I want to check my advice on this with you, Kat, because I feel like your expertise is way beyond mine on this. But I often tell people not to focus as much on the food, but on the outputs of that food. So if your pet is having a nice, healthy poo that you are picking up in the park, if they've got good energy levels, healthy skin, teeth and coat, and a good body condition, you're probably getting nutrition just about right. Like, as you say, you could probably always put a little bit of extra omega-3 in there. There might be some micronutrients, but actually, looking at your dog, you should be able to tell whether they're healthy, just as we feel fit and healthy when we're getting our nutrition right. And that's how I sort of cut through some of the debates about what is the right type of food. So can I just sense check that advice with you, make sure I'm on the right track?
Yeah, I think that's really fair, particularly if what they're feeding is some degree of commercial diet. I think there is an argument to say that bodies are exceptionally good at surviving on whatever nutrients they are given. And
True.
if you are health on the outside doesn't always indicate nutritional balance, health on the inside. I always think about these kids that occasionally pop up in like the Daily Mail that have eaten nothing but Dairy Lee triangles and ready salted crisps for 18 years and are somehow like 6-foot strapping young men. And I think it's just it's just the testament to how amazing bodies are. But when it comes to animals, yes, if what they're eating, they're enjoying it and they're healthy and running about and their feces is relatively normally formed and they're shiny coated and well muscled, you're probably not going too far wrong. The risk with that is if you are feeding something hugely unconventional, it shouldn't be a laurel that you rest on. That's my only concern with that. It is, but if you are feeding something commercially prepared that, is complete and balanced, it's probably okay.
One of my last guests that was on used to work in Hong Kong as a vet over there, and they said that commercial pet food only came into Hong Kong relatively recently, compared to countries like the UK. And the change in the health of those animals was almost instantaneous. They used to see a huge amount of things like metabolic bone disease, various different, skin. But these dogs, generally were fed on, leftover meat and rice. That's generally what they had as staple diet. But as soon as commercial food came in, you saw a lot of these nutritional diseases that were considered quite normal for that dog population just simply disappear. So I think there's definitely an argument for that, isn't there? The
Yeah.
balanced nutrition, and it
Well,
sort of counteracts that narrative that these foods aren't great, and they're, you wouldn't feed yourself astronaut food every day and things like that. So
I think that's fascinating. I've never heard that. Um, but I think that is really interesting because that does counter, you're right, one of these very common, like, well, kibble's only been around for 50 years and my granny's
mm,
dog thrived on scraps. And this sort
mm,
of rose tinted view of the past that animals were always okay, just feeding, eating our leftovers. And therefore it's worse today because we're able to give
mm,
them balanced nutrition. That's really interesting that, within living memory and
mm,
recent memory, that's not entirely the case because that's another very beguiling argument. This is just new and it's not natural and, you know,
mm,
they survived without it. Why on earth should we feed it? I feed my children. Why can't I feed my dog? There's all of these arguments, um, sort of against sense, just complete, just open the
mm.
bag and feed the food and stop worrying about
Yeah.
it. But that's not a very good marketing strap line.
Yeah, my grandma's dog used to get table scraps, but it was also roaming the streets most of the time. So completely scavenging on, and probably managed to get a relatively balanced diet doing that. But that's not how dogs live anymore, is it? They are generally in the house, and the case study that I referred to, these dogs were all kept in flats in Hong Kong. So whatever they were given was all they got.
Yeah,
And that obviously led to those problems. But I wanted to get onto we can't talk about nutrition without talking about obesity because it is one of the biggest welfare issues in the UK, with around half of pets considered overweight. But only a small fraction of owners recognise that their pets need to lose weight. So where is this mismatch coming from, and how have we got ourselves into this place where we've got such a huge problem with overweight pets?
quite literally. Well, I think it's just being overweight is due to an excess of calories. It doesn't really matter where those calories are coming from. It's just because you eat too much. And I wish it wasn't, but it is. You know? And it's not just like for us, it's often not the meals that make pets fat, it's the snacks. It's the extras that they get. And it is very hard to change it. And yeah, you're right. Owners struggle to see body condition score their pets and see they're overweight. And I think we've fought it for a long time. And it's sort of slightly impossible circle to square because it's always going to happen. Um, there's talk of a GLP-1 drug for dogs coming,
I've
which I
got to do a
think,
podcast on that. I think I've got to
yeah,
do a podcast on it. Yeah.
which, on the one hand, you're like, well, that's absolutely ridiculous. Why on earth do we need something like that for our dogs? All we have to do is feed them less. They are not opening that bag and pouring the
They're
folding
not
bowl.
popping to the shops
We
and
do
buying
it.
their own food. Yeah.
Exactly. But humans know that. And yet we're struggling. We all struggle. Lots of us struggle with our weight. The GLP-1s have just been fantastic for helping lots of people lose weight. And you think, well, if a dog is overweight, um, we all know how hard it is to get weight off them, even with really committed owners.
Mm.
Having that extra tool in the toolbox, actually, I think is going to be fantastic for ultimately for the benefit of their health. Um, so I don't have the answer, Paul, because if any of us had the answer, they wouldn't be
You'd have
big.
solved it.
Yeah, and I think it's just something that we have to bang on about in consults and weigh them, and you know, the whole team approach, and our nursing team and
Mm,
our reception teams and our client care people to just all sing from the same hymn sheet about, I think they're just a bit big. Can we help you cut back a bit? How could we do that? Could we do a diet change? What are they eating? That
mm.
kind of thing. But yes, I don't think we're ever going to solve it.
It's a very complex problem, isn't it? So I'm going to do a little bit of a quick fire round with you now
Oh,
on some subjects. So my first one is raw feeding, incredibly divisive, almost a lightning rod in the pet health space. How do you approach that conversation? Why do you think it is such a divisive subject, and how do you approach the conversation around that diet?
I think it's a divisive subject because it's an identity for people. It's almost a religious choice for a lot of people. Some people just come at it because, they just, heard it was good and started it. But I think a lot of people are very focused on it being raw. They are a raw feeder. That is part
Hmm.
of their personal identity. So when they hear anything to the contrary about that, again, because their decisions are made out of love for their animals and a passion for their pets, there is a very defensive attitude towards it. Um, I don't think the profession is particularly defensive in return. In fact, I think a lot of us shy away from those conversations completely because we're so desperate to not upset people.
Mm.
Um, but I think a lot of it is to do with the fact that it is a very, if you're in the raw feeding world, you're part of a club that you love desperately and can be quite evangelical about. That's why.
It's challenging belief systems, isn't it? Which is
I'm trying
incredibly
not to say the
difficult
word
to do.
religion here, but yeah, it's
Yeah,
not dissimilar for many
yeah.
people.
Mm. And another hot subject, grain-free diets have become hugely popular. I think partly a bit driven by a lot of human diet trends. What are your thoughts on it? What does the evidence say?
So there's no evidence to suggest that a grain-free diet is of any benefit, particularly to the vast majority of pets. Some seem to do better without it, but there'll always be a dog that does better or a pet that does better on different diets. But there is a very strong correlation between grain-free diets and dilated cardiomyopathy that was noticed in the US because they have a different reporting system to us. I once spoke to a cardiologist in the UK and was like, well, we don't have that here. And he was like, we do, I've seen it, but we don't have the same reporting system. So it's not quite as
Mm,
highlighted. Um, and then there was a lot of fuss about it all being a big conspiracy, but it's not. We just haven't found the causal agent yet for the reason why grain-free diets can predispose some animals to dilated cardiomyopathy. I think if people want to feed a grain-free, and it's come from the human side, a lot of animal nutrition follows humans. So, you know, 10 years ago, we were all talking about how bloated we got on bread and wheat, and pet food followed suit. And then everyone's like, oh, it's not natural. You don't see a wolf in a wheat field. And I'm like, well, no, but neither do you see them snacking on sweet potatoes, which is, what it's been replaced with. And I
mm,
don't, nobody eats uncooked wheat apart from cows. Um,
mm,
so again, if you want to feed your pet a grain-free diet and you feel they do better on it, you go for it because we have got complete and balanced options for that as well. But
mm,
if you're going to do that, I think it is very important to go with a brand who has got a history of being excellent formulators, because it's something about the formulation of these diets that is off in some brands that's kicking off the problem. We don't know what it is yet, but there are some companies who produce
mm,
grain-free diets who've not had a single case, and there are others that do that have had loads. And so it's
mm.
something in the balance of the nutrition.
That's really interesting. And finally, I just wanted to talk about lifestyle driven diets, which we've seen emerging relatively recently, I would say. So, vegan diets for owners who don't want to feed their dogs meat, I would say predominantly, insect based proteins as a sustainable option. Do you see these as responsible choices, or do you think they're more about reflecting human lifestyles than pet needs? An interesting question.
Well, I think when it comes to vegan diets, it's absolutely, we all know who's making the decision here. The owner is. And again, the market noticed that, some pet food formulators, pet food manufacturers noticed a gap in the market or created a problem that didn't exist. Have you ever thought about feeding your dog a vegan diet? And then created a solution for it. And so at the heart of everything, regardless of what we feed our animals, we have a responsibility to feed them a healthy, balanced diet. And we are given that opportunity by pet food companies to be able to do that in a myriad of ways that we choose to, because complete and balanced diets have been created for them. We've got an enormous amount of research. We know exactly what the micronutrient balance is needed. And there are companies out there offering us solutions in every which way we want, one of which is vegan diets. And so dogs can eat a vegan diet. We can create complete and balanced diets that don't contain any meat for them. We don't know yet what the long-term consequences of those diets are, because they haven't been around long enough to do any lifetime studies. But it can be done. And there are some, well, there's one brand in the UK that is leading in the vegan field, and that was formulated by a board certified veterinary nutritionist. So they are doing it as well as it can be done. I think it comes down to an ethical debate then about whether it is, you may have chosen as a human to make an ethical decision to not eat animal products, but is it okay to impose that ethical choice on your pet? Can we make that decision for them? Now, if we can make that decision for them in a way that provides them with everything they need to nourish them, then maybe the answer is yes. But I think it's a really interesting debate. It's slightly different when it comes to cats, because they are obligate carnivores. We can create synthetic taurine for them, but we have no idea what the long-term implications of that are. And I think the balance is shifted because dogs are to some extent omnivorous, cats are not. And so I think that adds an extra layer into the ethics and morals of that decision-making process, that I think it comes down to the individual person. But I think my personal stance is I don't think we can ethically feed cats in a vegan way. I just don't think that, as animal welfareists, that's the right decision. I think for dogs, we probably can. I wouldn't choose it for my animals, but there's a lot of kind of diets that I wouldn't choose for my animals. But if a client wants to do it, then I think I can support them to do it as safely as possible.
It's really interesting, isn't it? The whole sort of production line of pet foods. Because I think historically, I mean, even when probably we graduated, we were told that most pet foods, and it's probably true at the time, were made from the byproducts of human meat production. But I heard a statistic the other day, and I do need to fact check it, but it was that 26% of all animals now produced for meat are going directly into pet food. And I just thought that was really interesting. Like, because there's still this misconception, isn't there, that pet food uses a lot of byproducts of meat, but actually there are a lot of animals now being farmed just to feed our pets, which I just thought was a really interesting
That
stat.
would be yeah, that's really interesting, because that would make me say, well, is that 26% of the total sort of bulk of animal protein that is produced, is that going into pet food? So that I could probably believe, actually,
Mm,
because the pet population is massive. People are feeding, people have to feed pet food. It wouldn't surprise me. And also when you think about byproducts, so a lot, you're absolutely right. When we graduated, and even now, some things have stayed the same, but not
mm.
much. Um,
No.
Animal byproducts is just anything from an animal, like that isn't going in. Well, it's not that it's not going into the human food chain. Humans can eat animal byproducts as well, but it's generally things that aren't going into the human food chain. And that's things like offal. How much of a percentage of a cow is offal? Probably quite a lot when you think about lungs and tracheas and livers
Mm.
and spleens and kidneys and intestines and, tongs. So I'd be interested to know, is that 26% of the total animal protein produced, or is that 26% of the cuts of
Animals.
meat that
Yeah.
would normally go into the human production, like chicken breast and
Mm.
recognizable cuts of lamb and beef? Because that is possible, given some of the diets that are available now, and the fact that they do say things like chicken breast and finest
Human
cut.
grade meat. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
all the meat that's in pet food is human grade in the EU,
Mm.
but are those premium cuts going into pet food? Some
Mm.
of them, certainly for some brands, they are, because if it says chicken breast on the ingredients list, it has to be chicken breast in the pet food. And I think
Mm.
that, if that's the case, then there are some very big sustainability questions to be asked, because, you know, animals don't care that it's chicken breast. We care that it's chicken breast, but they don't. And is that right to be sending that? And what's happening to the rest of that chicken? Where's the offal from that chicken going? Is there enough of a demand from the pet food market to take the entirety of the chicken? Or is there some waste now because the pet food market is taking the premium cuts and more chicken overall is having to be produced? That would be really interesting to know.
Yeah, definitely one to watch, isn't it? And I
Yeah.
definitely need to go and do a bit more research on that, I think, because often these statistics get thrown at you and it does make you think. But like you say, we should really be looking into it, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
I just wanted to go back to something around the confusion around pet food labels,
Mhm.
because I've heard you talk about this before, and they really are meant to guide people, aren't they? But most people find them really confusing. So what should people look for when they're choosing a pet food? I think you've already sort of hinted at some of the key things they should be looking for, but could you just share them?
Yeah. So the problem is there's very little information on pet food packaging that is of any use for choosing a pet food. And an enormous amount of what's written on the packaging is marketing. Even the ingredients list. So, of course, we all turn over the packaging and look at the ingredients list. And when you tell people that's not actually the best way to judge a pet food, you get an enormous amount of derision because it seems so obvious that it is, but it isn't. The ingredients list is a legal document. It has to list in weight order the ingredients in the pet food, but that doesn't equate to quality, digestibility, balance, formulation, anything. And then now they're manipulated for marketing. So it'll say fresh chicken breast is the first ingredient, but it's there by weight. Chicken is 70% water. You go and you beetle down to the bottom and look at the protein, and it's 26% protein, which is a very average protein for pet food. But 70% chicken breast at the top of the list sounds great. I think the things you want to be looking for mainly are the words complete and balanced, if that's what if you want to feed a pet food that's just that. The life stage. So is it for a growing animal? Is it for an adult animal? Is it for a senior pet? Um, and that's almost it. Sometimes you will see the words talking about how it was formulated. So formulated to AFCO standards, formulated and tested using feeding trials. But interestingly, you generally don't see that very much in pet foods produced in the EU. That's very American. So you will find that on packaging in America, but you won't find it quite so much because AFCO is the American standards of feeding, whereas in the EU we're governed by a very similar body called FEDIAF. And for FEDIAF, and it took me ages to figure this out. So for FEDIAF, the wording complete and balanced is a very legally tight wording. So those are really the only things. And then after that, it's all guff. And that's sort of the problem, really. And I suppose the other things you should look for are a batch number, contact details of the pet food company, but who's beetling down to the very bottom of the bag to see if they've left their phone number on there? Nobody. So that it's hard because there isn't a lot. And I spend more time than is healthy when I go into Pets at Home, looking at the front of the bag and the back of the bag and the things that it says and the bits that are actually useful. And the honest answer is there's not a lot.
Yeah. I think what you said there is just really, really helpful, though. Complete, balanced, and life stage, and that coupled with do enough exercise, don't feed too much, and don't feed loads of treats, I think would probably solve that problem. I think we've just done it. We've just solved the global obesity epidemic.
We've done
in
it.
pets.
We've done it, but we won't make any sort of marketing splash with that.
It's really boring.
It's very boring. And that's why the whole thing has just run away with itself. Because if I was on the other side of this knowledge gap and I was just an ordinary pet, and I'd be like, what do you mean I can just do that? And that can't be. I'm bombarded with information about my children. I'm constantly worried, are they eating enough broccoli? Have they had enough calcium? And it's just so different for animals. And that's why there's this big knowledge gap and why this marketing is filling it and sort of driving a narrative that just isn't true and ultimately confusing pet owners horribly.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because you say that there's a big gap. It's being filled with marketing. It's been filled with, on social media, influencers. Thank goodness for you stepping into that space as well to really combat that. But do you think, because vets historically we are quite rigid, aren't we? We're quite evidence based, sometimes a bit preachy. Do you think that's hindering us a little bit in leading some of these conversations?
I think any science-based profession takes a long time to embrace new ideas and new concepts. And I think that is a very good thing. If we leapt on every bandwagon that came along and every news report and every paper, we would be all over the place. Science is a slow moving, very exact vehicle, and so it should be. And we are veterinary scientists. And so therefore, I think baked into us far more than we ever realize is a hugely knowledgeable understanding of science and evidence. What we also have is a massive dose of the Dunning-Kruger effect for all of us, because we know exactly how wide and how deep the understanding of our subject is. And especially for those of us in general practice who do just a little bit of everything, we appreciate hugely how much there is that we don't know. And I think that is what stops a lot of us, no matter how qualified, communicating more publicly, because we constantly worry that we might be wrong or there's
Mm.
something we miss. 1 minute of a TikTok is very hard to get across any sort of nutritional concept when it's so challenging. And I try very hard, but it can be done, because the people to whom you are communicating are not, it's not a room full of delegates of your peers. It's pet owners, and therefore the conversation can be different. That's not to say that pet owners aren't intelligent; they're very intelligent, but the level of conversation is different. But we constantly worry that we'll get it wrong, and you just think somebody else is better than me. Why would I be the one that would say it?
Yeah.
And therein lies the rub, why we don't, and leave a vacuum that gets filled.
I think imposter syndrome is very well reported in our profession, isn't it? And at every stage of our career as well, we
Yeah.
all feel it at some point. But you do this so well, and also the other thing you do really well is calling out misinformation as well. But does that openness attract pushback? How do you deal with people who strongly disagree with you online? Because I see you get a huge amount of support for the things that you put online, but there is also people that disagree. How do you deal with that?
Well, yeah, it's not easy and it's not pleasant. And it takes, like, some days it is horrid. And then I think, I don't know why I bothered. Why have I done this? This is ridiculous. Well, this is going to seem really trite, but I do think it's important. And I have built a platform. And, with that comes a degree of responsibility to use it. And to, we took an oath, didn't we, to protect that. It all sounds a bit, yeah, it sounds it just sounds ridiculous, but we did take an oath to protect the welfare of the animals in our care. And we do,
Mm.
I am lucky enough to have this platform, and I do think it's important to use it and to tackle the things that really bother me. But you do get kickback, and I think it is really hard. And I just try really hard to be polite and respectful and educate people and understand why they disbelieve me so vehemently, and give them the facts and let them do with it what they wish. But some people are vile, absolutely vile. And you think, this is ridiculous. We're talking about pet food and you're saying the most horrible things to me and about me. And it's just pet food,
Please keep on doing it, because you are inspiring so many people. One final question, which is, who has inspired you most in your career or your online work? It can be a pet or a person. Can you tell me who they are and why they have inspired you?
I think there's not one person who has inspired me. I have never been fortunate enough in my online or real life world really to have a mentor. And so, but I'm a very, very independent person. So I've been okay. Let's not get out the tiny violins for me. But I think and it's a bit of a cop out, but there are so many people in this profession who I think are inspiring. And I think that, I really consider myself like a communicator about how awesome this profession is. That's the other thing that inspired me to be amazed right from the start, was just how amazing these people that surround me are. And, you know, each person has their own speciality. Like, I was taught by Sarah Caney at university, and now I see her occasionally and get on really well with her. She's a phenomenal feline vet who's done the most incredible things. Sarah Heath and behaviour,
Mhm.
Marge Chandler and nutrition. Um, there's loads of, each one has this phenomenal level of knowledge that I personally find very inspiring and would love, you know, to be them when I grow up. But I can take their knowledge, and they're so generous with their knowledge. People like that in our profession who are world leaders in their field. Any one of us practically could ping them an email or pick up the phone and contact them and ask them a question, and they would get back to us with an answer. So I think, I don't know whether it does sound like a bit of a cop out, but I think it is everybody. And the honest inspiration, I suppose, for what I do is not one person. It is this fabulous profession that we're part of. And to be able to be seen as a spokesperson for it and somebody who's respected within it is the greatest honor of my existence. It was not why I set out to do. I did not set out to be well known myself. That was not the aim. The aim for me was to be able to communicate my peers. And so I feel really, really fortunate to be able to do that.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you for what you do. And thank you for joining me today and sharing your insights. I think, you know, this conversation has really sort of cemented how important the topic of nutrition and misinformation is, but how you can cut through this really, really clearly and concisely with evidence, openness and honesty. And I just really want to thank you for that conversation today. It was great.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. You'll find all the relevant links to this conversation in the show notes. If you enjoyed it, please follow us and leave a review. It really helps other people discover the podcast. For more insights on topics like this, you can connect with me on social media at Dr Paul the Vet, or check out my website, theconsultroom.co.uk.